Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And here we are after the second race of the season, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. What are our thoughts? Where do we go from here?
In my opinion, the Saudi Arabia race was a tale of two different races. In my opinion, it's a tale of two very different races. The first half of the race, I'll split it up into two different sections. There's before the safety car and after the safety car.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the race before the safety car was exciting. There was a lot of close on-track battles. There were a lot of drivers kind of cluster, and there were a lot of overtakes. There was a lot of action going on. However, Lance Stroll stopped the car, which I don't think they really needed the safety car because he parked right in front of where they could just back the car out of the way of the officially off the track. But after the safety car, there wasn't really a whole lot of overtaking.
Yeah.
People just kind of settled into their spots, and it was like 20, maybe a little bit more than 20 laps of just It was incredibly boring.
Yeah.
Incredibly boring. So it really was the tale of two different races.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. First of all, I mean, we have to give props to Sergio Perez for a beautifully managed race. And we'll get on to him and Red Bull in a little bit, but it was, I mean, he, I think, has solidified himself as the street circuit guru for that team, and it's interesting that it happened this early in the season, just because that puts him and Max on very close to even playing field for the championship. But just a beautifully managed race, and back to your point of just kind of the tale of two races. We saw with Ferrari's sort of dummy strategy to get Lance Stroll into the pits, and then Lance Stroll came out, and they had both. The Ferraris had overcut Lance Stroll, and there was a lot of really interesting strategic battles going on, really close racing, and then the safety car came in, and it put everybody on the same strategy. You even had Lewis Hamilton, who had started the race on hards, was trying to go really, really long and put on some softs at the end to have a tire advantage, and that neutralized that. Like, basically any unique creative strategy games that the teams were trying to play, because there was a lot of varying strategy, like who were gonna, like, a lot of teams were trying to go long to see if they could get softs at the end. A lot of teams were going in early and putting on hards. Then they realized that the hard tires were not were not as performing as well as they thought. So there was a lot of really interesting strategy going on, and then the safety car just kind of neutralized everything, put everybody on the same strategy, and then it was just pretty much a strategic battle to the end. There wasn't a whole lot. I mean, Max Verstappen, and the safety car came out perfectly for him, because he came out prior to pitting, and he was in P4, and then all of a sudden he got a cheap pit stop. Boom, he's P4 on lap 17, 18. So
it was. Yeah, once the safety car, pretty much everyone was running hard tires, and it just, the second half of the race was pretty boring. It was pretty boring.
Yeah, but I think also too we're really spoiled with these races in Saudi Arabia, because the past two have been stellar. I mean, you
last year
in 2021, you had second to last race in the championship, a new racetrack, nobody had ever been there. Lewis Hamilton won. You had the whole drama of Max Verstappen brake checking Lewis, and Lewis still won, and it put them going on even in points going into Abu Dhabi and all of this stuff. And then in 2022, you had just an amazing wheel-to-wheel battle between Charles and Max Verstappen, and this year. So I think we were a little bit spoiled with the past 2 races. So, I think
it was a good reminder that this is a very narrow street circuit.
Yeah, it is, and it is very similar to Baku without the 90-degree corners.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really great to see Sergio Perez win the way that he did. Just beautifully managed. Was other than the last lap when Max Verstappen pipped him for the fastest lap.
Yeah. He
was faster than Max pretty much the whole time. So overall good race. Overall, what do you think? A to F.
For the race, I'd give it a solid. It's tough. I would give it a B. I think the last half of it was a snooze fest. I'd say B minus even.
Yeah.
The first half was great. Like if we were to like stop it as soon as the safety car came out, okay, cool, race is over. I would have said, man, what an incredible race. But the second half was just so boring. I give it like a B minus.
Yeah. I was gonna be right around there. I hear interesting. I think it was either Crofty or Martin Brundle over the broadcast said something really interesting about it, or maybe it was Bernie, who was the former head of strategy at Aston Martin, which was great to have her on the broadcast as her. First of all, it's great to have a woman voice on the broadcast, but someone who is incredibly knowledgeable about F1 and especially strategy. But it was because the car's rear wing was still poking out. The GPS was registering it on the track.
Gotcha.
And because initially the marshals do not, like the marshals up in the booth, or the stewards up in the booth, do not have access to camera angles instantly, and they were looking at the GPS data, and it said it was on track. So they threw the safety car for a precaution. Gotcha. I think that is what happened. I can't remember for sure, but
I must have missed that.
Which is really unfortunate because, again, like you said, I don't think it was the most necessary thing in the world. They could have even just thrown a virtual safety car for, 30 seconds or something just to get everybody slowed down. But anyway, moving right along, this is where we go, part of our podcast episode where we get into all of the teams, how their races went, and giving them a rating on the weekend. These ratings we try and do based on every session, practice, qualifying, and the race, not just the race. And we always do this in the current reverse Constructors Championship order, which right now 10th place is McLaren, which...
Yikes.
Granted, still very early in the season, but not where I would have imagined them being.
I knew they would be like they were gonna. I knew this was gonna be a struggle, and I put them in our preseason prediction. I put them down as 8th, and I even thought that was harsh, but
I had them as 7th.
Yeah, 10 being last right now. Granted, it is only the second race, and they still got a long way to go. But we said that about Ferrari last year, and a lot can change. So, for the whole weekend, I'm gonna give them a C minus because Oscar Piastri, he made Q3, didn't he?
He qualified P8.
Yeah, so he made Q3. They had a pretty decent,
or P9, started P8 due to Charles Leclerc's
so
penalty.
They had a really decent qualifying, and I think in practice, they were very quiet in practice. Like they weren't. I think they were more focused on collecting data rather than trying to set fast times like everyone else around them was trying to do. So I'd give them a C minus. Just because practice and qualifying was decent, like it was a decent weekend for them, but the race was just so horrendous.
Yeah, I want to give them a C minus, but I think I'm going to give them a D plus, and I think I do that just because what undid their race was both cars suffered wing damage on the first lap, and they both had to pit, and I didn't look at the onboards, and I don't know what that came from. I think there was some contact, at least for Oscar Piastri. I think there was some contact with one of the Alpines. I actually don't know where Lando Norris's contact came in and why he had a broken front wing, but just, and in the middle phases of the race, or the closing phases of the race, they were struggling to keep up with Logan Sargent's Williams. So I think, they had a really, really tough race. I think some of it a little bit self-inflicted just because of the damage that both cars had. But yeah, you're right. You cannot overlook Oscar Piastri's qualifying effort, like a huge thing. And at one point in the race, Oscar Piastri finished ahead of Lando Norris, and Oscar Piastri also ended up finishing ahead of Logan Sargent as well, because he just had more pace, and that was the first time since Carlos Sainz was racing for McLaren that Lando Norris had been beaten by his teammate unequivocally. And especially in qualifying, but during the race, they were asked to swap, and they had to swap around, and because Piastri was faster, and I think that's a really interesting place for McLaren to be in, because I don't think they've been in a place like that since Carlos Sainz raced there. But so it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially as we go towards Australia. But I
was surprised and a little bit excited to see Oscar Piastri faster than Lando. It's not something that I expected to happen, but I was really happy to see, because for the second race of your F1 career, you're faster than your teammate who's been in that car since 2019. That's pretty darn good.
Yeah, so that's definitely going to be something to monitor over the course of the season.
Yeah.
And so, Oscar Piastri, props to him. I'm curious as to how, where Lando Norris's pace went, but, I just, at this point, I feel bad for McLaren. I really do. I would not have imagined that they would be 10th and undoubtedly the slowest car on track right now, which is not a place they've been in since 2018. So after McLaren, also tied in the bottom with 0 points, but by virtue of finishing position are ahead of McLaren, we have Alpha Tauri. And it looked like at one point Tsunoda was going to end up in the points and was just pipped at the last couple laps by Kevin Magnussen for that final point. So it was a battle of Haas or Alpha Tauri as to who was going to get off the board first, and Kevin Magnussen put it up in a P10, but Yuki Tsunoda had a great race. He started P16, at one point was running P8, ended up P11. Nick De Vries also started P18, ended up P14, so both of them
they had both pretty good, decent races.
De Vries plus 4 on the day, Tsunoda plus 5 on the day. All in all, a pretty decent race. I would have liked to have seen them a little bit better in qualifying, but given where they are right now and where they came from last week, I would probably give them a C plus or even a B minus.
I'd say, I'd give them a good B, maybe B minus.
I think their only blemish is qualifying 16th and 18th. Both cars knocked out in Q1, but they made the best of their races.
Yeah, they did. They both made the best. Unfortunately, didn't finish in the points, but considering where they started and where they ended, it was a pretty good race for them.
Pretty solid, yeah.
Well managed.
So I think just that getting knocked out in Q1 is not a place where that team is used to being, and it has led Franz Tost to say that he doesn't trust his engineers anymore because they're not, the upgrades and the parts are not working the way that they expect them to when they get to the track, and so this is causing a lot of upheaval in the team right now, and
it's not a good place
to
be.
Yeah, they're not in a good place, so it'll be interesting to see where they go over the next few weeks, but I think that's why I'll give them a C plus on the weekend, just because they were still struggling a little bit, and but they had a really good race pace. Up next is Williams.
Finally not last.
Yeah,
it's nice to see that. It's nice to see that.
Yeah. At one point they were 7th. Coming into the weekend they were 7th because they were ahead of Haas, but Haas pipped him for a point, and because The average finishing position of the team is lower at Williams. They are 8th behind Haas. But it ended up just being Logan Sargent carrying the banner across the line today.
Yep.
Alex Albon retired early with brake failure, which is not great. But all in all, I think a decent day at the office for Logan Sargent, finishing P16 after starting P20. I think he had a time to get into Q2, but it ended up being deleted.
Yeah,
which is so annoying because turn 27, you can't go off at turn 27. So why I was blown away by that decision, and I think he could have gotten into Q2.
It was stupid. I'll just say that FIA deleting his lap time, and I think they deleted another driver's lap time for the same thing. Where it happened, absolutely ridiculous, absolutely stupid. FIA, come on now, like that. That's just dumb.
Yeah, and it's just unfortunate. Dumb. They were putting themselves together a really good race. I think Albon was threatening for points, and at one point, James Vowles came over the radio and said that if he kept up the pace, because he was right on Nico Hulkenberg at one point. He was in P 12 or 13, and he said, if the pace kept up, he could be on for points, but just didn't do the best job managing that final phase of the race. Yeah. But he's a rookie, in a Williams. I think that's all you can expect from him. Aside
from the brake failure, I'm going to give them I think I'm going to give them a C+. Because I think had they not had that brake failure and one of their drivers finished in the points, I'd give him an A. But yeah, I'd say, well, I'll still give him a B-. I'll still give him a B.
Yeah,
I'd still give him a B.
I'm right on the bridge between B- and C+.
Because other than that brake failure in the last couple laps, they had a great weekend.
Yeah,
they did.
Did.
Other than those two things and the brake failure, I mean, that's out of everyone's control. It's not something like we saw in Bahrain with Esteban Ocon, where part of the penalties they got were like the team's fault. So like that's just something out of everyone's control. So I'd give him a B. I'm going to give him a B.
Yeah, I agree with that. Something out of their control. They put together a decent race. I think, again, the blemishes there are Logan's time getting deleted and just, again, he got overtaken by Zhou Guanyu and some other people just with more experience. And I think that, the way that he managed the closing phase, it was a good learning race for him. I think this is a weekend where, a lot of things went against Logan, and I think and I hope that he's going to learn a lot from it and take into consideration, and he's going to be having those conversations with his performance engineers and everything. But all in all, I think a decent weekend for Williams.
I'm going to say that. I know I remember going on a huge rant about this last year in one of our episodes, but with the track limits thing, circling back to the track limits thing, It has to be more consistent. In some places you won't get a penalty until all four wheels are off. You won't get a penalty if like maybe two wheel, but in that case it was like one wheel was over on the white line and they gave him a penalty or they deleted his lap time. It's like on some tracks in some parts it's like they won't give you a penalty or delete your lap time until all four wheels. So it's like, it's just the inconsistencies for me that really, really frustrate me.
Yeah.
And I'll talk, that also plays into later when we talk about Fernando Alonso's penalty and then non-penalty.
I think the biggest thing about Logan's penalty in qualifying is that it wasn't on the actual turn. It was it was the runoff right near pit entrance. And I think
he got like one tire over.
I think part of the concern with that and policing it the way that they did is just so drivers aren't cutting it really close to the wall, because you're approaching that wall at almost 190 miles an hour. And so that can be very dangerous if you're really trying to exploit the track limits all the way. But it still leads to ambiguity and inconsistencies in the way that you police track limits, especially on a track like Jeddah where the walls are the entire way around the circuit incredibly close. Like it's really hard. So yeah, I don't know that there's an exact solution for that other than just, making those. I tell you what the solution to all of the track limits problems are. Just put grass on the other side of the line. Put grass there. You don't need these asphalt runoffs that go for miles like in Paul Ricard or wherever. You just put grass there.
Yeah.
If you put grass there, like Suzuka, the reason why everybody loves Suzuka and it's so challenging is because the grass is right there. You can't go off.
And some parts of like Monza.
Yeah.
Parts of like
old tracks.
Older tracks, even like at Imola as well. I'm trying to think of some other ones.
Parts of Spa.
Hungary.
Parts of Austria. Just some of those older European natural road
or
courses.
even like on in the Qatar Moto GP track. It's not grass, but it's still AstroTurf.
Yeah.
I mean, it behaves very similarly to grass on an F1 car and tires. So
yeah, that's my solution. Just put grass everywhere.
Then no one will come.
Then no one will cut corners. Yeah. You can't, because guess what? If you're going to end up in the weeds. Yeah. Anyway, go on and on, but we don't have time for that. That's a whole other episode. Moving on to 7th place in the Constructors' Championship with 1 point is Haas. And it's another weekend where you had really, really solid qualifying. You had Hülkenberg qualified P10, Magnussen qualified P13, and Magnussen ended up getting a point this weekend and put a really good race. But Hülkenberg, net loss of positions on the weekend would have been lower had it not been for Sargent's mismanagement of the final stint. Yeah. So another really interesting kind of tale of two races for those people, for those drivers. Kevin Magnussen had a really, really great race with some good strategy. Nico Hülkenberg a little less so. And I think for Nico, he's still just getting used to the car and getting used to coming back into F1.
Yeah, and that's what it is. Because he out-qualified Kevin Magnussen. But then, when it comes to the race, didn't do as well as Kevin. But I think for me, I'm going to give him... I'll average it out. I think I'll give it a C.
Yeah, it was a very average weekend for them.
Yeah.
C.
Which C is not bad.
And no, they had some really great moments. They had some less than stellar moments. I mean, Nico Hülkenberg put it up into Q3, but it was Kevin Magnussen who ended up getting the point. It was great. It's a very peaky car, I think, and so it's tough, but. It's just a very average weekend for them. I think that car just seems very 7th place, and that's where they're at right now. And I think they're 7th fastest car. I think they're going to end up 7th place, and it was just a very 7th place drive for them. It's very average, nothing to write home about. And I think, again, we're just, as we're starting to get into these races, we're starting to learn a lot more about where these teams lie. And it was just a really quiet race for them. We didn't hear a whole lot about them throughout, except for, they had a really great bout. They had some really great battles at the end. Logan Sargent and Nico Hülkenberg really, really getting after it. Yuki Tsunoda and Kevin Magnussen had a great battle in the last couple laps going for that final point as Yuki's tires started to fall off. So all in all, they had some really great moments in the race, but other than that, very, very quiet, very average performance. Yeah. They did everything right, no wonky strategies which they're known to do from time to time. Yeah. So it was a pretty average race for them. Moving on to 6th place is Alfa Romeo, which.
They also had a very quiet weekend.
Was a tough weekend for them, though. Yeah. It was Zhou qualified 11th, ended up 13th. Bottas qualified 14th, ended up last driver on track.
All of the Ferrari powered cars this year. Maybe the new Ferrari power unit is just not living up to the hype of what it was.
I don't know. And I don't know where it's coming from because it was so powerful last year.
It was incredibly powerful last year, and all of the tests on the dyno, it was, they thought they had gained a second overall from where they were last year, which would have put them right up next to Red Bull if it had actually lived up to that. So I'm going to give them a D for the weekend. It wasn't a good weekend for them.
I'll give him a D+ because Joe in qualifying, putting that car P11 was pretty good. He was very, very close to Q3.
I think that was really the only highlight of the weekend, though, for them.
Yeah, it was a tough weekend. Valtteri Bottas had a really tough race, lots of pit stops, some damage. He was complaining of some problems with the car, like potential damage to the car, and he was last on track today. So all in all, really tough day at the office for Alfa Romeo. So I'll give them a D+ just because their qualifying was better than their race. It was a brighter spot on the weekend. Up next is Alpine, and I think Alpine this week had a much more consistent weekend than they did last year.
I'm gonna give them a B for that.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna give them a B+. I think, they both finished in the points. It was a double points weekend for them. Ocon in 8th, Gasly P9th. There was moments where they got their elbows out, but generally were really quick. They were really quiet. They look like they are just the 5th fastest team right now, and it looks like they're in a really good spot. They had good qualifying. Gasly ended up P9. Ocon qualified P6, which is a great qualifying. I think the thing that keeps them from being an A- or a B+ is their race wasn't as good, but their race ended up being, I think, where they pretty accurate to where they are. Yeah. On average, 5th fastest. They're 5th in constructors right now. They just look very 5th. And to me, F1 right now has these. It looks like right now at this very moment there are like 3 tiers of F1 right now. Tier 1, Red Bull. Nobody's catching them. Yeah. Then you have this tier 2 of Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, that all look P2 to P4, right around there, fairly close. And then you have everybody else after that, the traditional midfield. Yeah. And Alpine is right at the top, which is, I think, where they want to be. I think they'll be hurt that Aston Martin is performing as well as they are. Yeah. But I think they're right where they need to be. I think they're right where they deserve to be and should be. And I think this race was much more representative of the weekend that they need compared to last weekend.
Yeah. I would agree.
Not a whole lot to say about Alpine, but the next team that we have on our list, there's a ton to talk about, which is Ferrari.
So I'm with giving them a grade for the weekend. I'm conflicted because they were extremely consistent, relatively in the same place, timing wise for all the practice sessions. They had a great qualifying, and they were right around. I think they got shafted by the safety car.
Yeah,
at the end,
definitely.
They looked like they were big braining everyone with the strategy, and then
it was completely ruined
by the safety car, which was kind of out of their control. But here's where I'm conflicted. If we go based off of where Ferrari currently is at, I would give them a B for the weekend, or maybe a B-.
I give them a C
because they had a great qualifying. They had a pretty decent qualifying. However, historically, or where everyone thought they were going to be,
or even just compared to where they were last year,
or compared to where they were at this point last year, F or D. Compared to where they were last year, both drivers were in the top 4 last year, and Charles almost won the race. Was very close to winning the race. And at this point in the season last year, everyone thought Ferrari was going to run away with it. It was going to be Ferrari's year. Everyone thought that. This year, if they want to have even a sniff of competing with Red Bull, even just a little sniff, a little taste.
I don't think anyone is going to this year.
Competing close to Red Bull, they have so much that they have to improve on. They have to improve on basically everything. And Charles said it. Charles was asked, where do you need improvement? And he was like, well, we're slow in the straights, and they're faster than us in the corners. So pretty much everywhere is what he said. So, this is tough because with where they are at as a team, I would say I give them a B- or like around that area, C+, B-. But it's frustrating.
Yeah, just for consistency's sake, I am going to evaluate them just on this weekend, because I think that's kind of what we've been doing for all of the teams. I think there's a little bit of like with Alpine, like they were much more improved compared to where they were last race. Mm-hmm. But all in all, operationally, I think with Ferrari this weekend, it was funny because they had an amazing qualifying session. Mm-hmm. Where Carlos ended up qualifying P5, which was P4 after, which is where they were about where they expected to be. Charles Leclerc set the second fastest time. Mm-hmm. He was P2 in qualifying, and he was only a tenth or so off of Perez, a tenth and a half off of Perez, which is an amazing. And Ferrari has always been good over one lap.
Yeah,
but their race pace was just not where it should be. Mm-hmm. But they were nailing the strategy, and I can't take how they ended up after the safety car. That's not their fault. They just ended up they just pitted a lap or two too early, and it allowed everybody in front of them to build a gap while they were warming up the tires and bringing the hard tires online, and then immediately safety car. All of those drivers got a cheap pit stop, and it was nothing from there. The Mercedes though were faster than them, and that's not great.
Yeah, considering Mercedes is hot garbage this year.
It's supposedly completely lost its identity. So there are some points in this weekend where I'm like, wow, has Ferrari really turned it around? Or was last week a complete anomaly? And then there are other parts of this week and I'm like, nope. Mm-hmm. They're right back. So I'm going to give them the most average to balance everything out, C. Mm-hmm. Right in the middle of the road. Their race pace needs to improve.
Yeah.
Their strategy, it looks like is improving.
The person the team that they've hired for strategy is doing some good.
And over one lap, that car is fast and is capable of fighting to be on the second or first row. Mm-hmm. So and it looked like that team is poised to be able to capitalize on the misfortune of others, but the race proved otherwise.
Yeah.
So I just think, and I put them in this P2 to P4 tier. But I think they're at the bottom of that right now. I think it's them, Mercedes, and then Aston Martin ahead.
I'm gonna before we move on, I'm gonna put my tinfoil hat on. This is just an empty Diet Coke can, but I'm gonna put my tinfoil hat on. I don't really know, because I'm protecting my mental health. I don't really know that much about the mass exodus of top people at Ferrari who are leaving the team. I don't really know much about it, but it seems like they were all leaving after the car was... I mean, they've all been leaving after the car was built. Mm-hmm. So my thinking is there's been some internal talks, and Fred Vasseur is the new team principal, and I know he's been in close communication with the Ferrari CEO. I'm wondering, because those are the same people who've been in charge of building the car the past however long, and they've built crap cars.
Really, really fast, but horrible at managing tires.
Yeah, horrible, and just overall, just bad cars. Bad cars. They've built bad cars, especially in 2020. Oh my God. But all those people are leaving. I'm wondering if there was either coming from Fred or the CEO, like, you need to figure this out, or either A, we fire you and make it public, or we'll give you an opportunity to resign on your own. And so there's this huge restructuring that is happening in Ferrari, and I can't remember if I might have made like a full-blown TikTok about this, or like a short, a YouTube short about this. and we say it often, there's a saying here in America, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Ferrari's been broken for a long time.
Yeah.
Arguably since 2008, 2009, because they had a really crappy year in 2009. 2010 and 11 looked hopeful. 12 looked really good, but that was purely just because of Fernando Alonso, being Fernando Alonso. But that machine has been broken for so long, and the restructuring that they're doing, it can't get worse.
Yeah.
And so I think that the restructuring that is happening and the mass exodus that is happening, I think it's going to negatively affect this season. Because I don't think Ferrari will improve much this season. They, as the other teams around them are improving, they'll probably be in tow. So they'll probably improve, but along with everyone else, they'll improve. But I think next year in 2024 and 2025, and then into 2026, they'll be set up really, really well to be regular title contenders again.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, and because when Mattia, the 2022 Mattia Binotto's last year, there is a whole regime change at Ferrari, the company itself. And Vigna, the CEO, started at the end of 2021 into 2022, and there was this whole regime change. Mattia Binotto was a part of the previous regime. His appointment by the former CEO, that was, and then this new CEO comes in. There's a whole bunch of new personnel and leadership at the Ferrari company, which is unique because Ferrari is the only Formula One team that answers to its road car division. You know, McLaren doesn't. Mercedes,
kind of.
Not
really.
Because that team is owned in 3 equal parts by Toto Wolff, Mercedes, and Daimler. And so Mercedes is actually the minority shareholder of that Formula One.
So there's
team.
very little influence by Mercedes.
McLaren doesn't answer to their road car division at all. Pretty much. I mean, Zach Brown, as the CEO of the McLaren racing team, answers to them maybe a little bit, but McLaren was a racing team before it was a road car division.
Yeah.
You know, Alfa Romeo doesn't, purely because Alfa Romeo is just a title sponsor to Sauber. Alpine is the only other team that I think compares like that, because Alpine being a subsidiary of Renault, and Renault is part owned by the French government. But I think ever since they rebranded to Alpine, I think they've had a little bit more autonomy, which has allowed them to achieve better results like they did, they have the past couple of years. So Ferrari, I mean, and then Red Bull, Williams is an independent team. Red Bull is an independent team because it's an energy drink company. Yeah. So Ferrari is so closely tied to their road car division that. And it's so unique in the sport. And that team has a lot of oversight from the whole Ferrari company as a whole, which I think is the reason why they have not won a championship since Michael Schumacher. It was Kimi Räikkönen coming off the back of Michael Schumacher. But back then, your team principal was Jean Todt. You had Ross Brawn on the team, and Michael Schumacher and Kimi Räikkönen were literally two of the best drivers of all time. And especially in the reign of dominance that Ferrari had with the trio of Schumacher, Brawn, and Todt, that team was that era of that team was the closest it was ever going to get to full autonomy. And because they were winning, the road car division didn't have to step in at all, and they completely managed themselves. I don't think that's a coincidence.
I remember there was an episode of Top Gear back when it was Jeremy Clarkson,
James May.
I'm just calling him Brian May, but not the guitarist for Queen.
Now Sir Brian May.
But that Jeremy Clarkson made a comment on an episode when they were talking about Ferrari. It was like, notice when Ferrari is consistently making good road cars, their Ferrari Formula One team is bad. when their Ferrari Formula One team is doing really good, they're making crap road cars. And so Jeremy said exactly what you're saying. If that team wants to regularly win, they either have to sacrifice their road division or they have to split the company, and the Formula One team cannot be managed by the road division.
Yeah, well, I think, and that's the interesting thing. Part of that is having Fred Vasseur as team principal, because Fred Vasseur left Renault to go to Sauber, now Alfa Romeo, because the Renault car company and the French government were too involved in the team. And he said, I can't work under these conditions, and left. And that's how Cyril Abiteboul became team principal. And so they've hired Fred for a very specific purpose. And part of me is wondering if they're trying to get back to that point where they have somebody in charge that's not Italian that can take control of that racing team and get it back to where it needs to go.
And that probably came from the CEO,
yes,
which is a good sign.
Yes. It's causing a lot of upheaval right now, which is why you're having senior people leave.
Well, those senior people built a crap car. So.
Well, the other thing, I saw this thing on TikTok that was like, it was like that Jake Gyllenhaal meme of him leaving, and like it was like a WWE something. He was like leaving through the smoke, and it was like Mattia Binotto leaving the team after building another crap car. And that's just because Mattia Binotto was also the head of the technical department. He had the aero and chassis, like a lot of sub departments that all reported to him. He reconsolidated his power in 2020 because of the way that team failed between 2019 and 2020, which it worked. You know, they got from where they were in 2020 to 2022, but that car has had an underlying problem of being really quick in qualifying, but completely going through its tires and not managing them well since 2017.
Yeah.
And probably even before then. But they just didn't have a quick car before then.
Yeah. Before then, they had a really fast car.
You know? So I think that car has had this... It's like McLaren. There's that weight distribution problem that McLaren has that is baked into the system right now, and it's the same thing with Ferrari. They don't have a car that manages its tires well, and that's a vehicle concept.
Yeah, which is why I tweeted today. I was like, next year will be our year, because honestly, after the first two races, I think it's safe to say that we can count Ferrari out of the championship, count them out, and with the restructuring that has happened, I think they could have a decent shot to put a car together that could win a championship next year.
Of course, we did say that about Red Bull at this point last year.
That is true.
I remember after Australia last year, we were like, there's no way Red Bull is going to win this championship. And lo and behold, they crushed it.
But if I say there's no way, if I believe in my heart of hearts that there's no way Ferrari can win, and then somehow miraculously that they do, or at least do better than what they're doing.
Yeah.
I also said this. I was like, if I just set myself up to expect the worst, like I'll never be let down.
Yeah.
I'm protecting my mental health here.
We're
all about protecting our mental health in 2023.
Back to Ferrari's
conversation.
Weekend. The last thing that I totally forgot about up until now, Leclerc recovered from P12 to P7. I don't think he was fast enough to go further than that.
Yeah.
And there were some times where a lot of strategic calls came into Charles very late that did not allow him to manage his race in a better manner. But you know, at one point he was keeping Max Verstappen in check before Max Verstappen jumped him through the race strategy. I think, you know, he was keeping Max Verstappen in check. Max was faster, but he got stuck behind Carlos and was just managing to the end. But I think a recovery from P12 to P7 to get to where they were, that can't be overlooked as well. Still a really solid C performance for me, but we have to move on. We're running low on time. So up next is Mercedes.
I'm going to give them a B.
I am also going to give them a B. Practice looked really rough for them, but they had a great qualifying and they had a fantastic race.
Yeah.
They were quick. Their race pace was better than the Ferraris. It's where they needed to be. George Russell There was a little bit of confusion. At one point wasn't on the podium and then was and then now wasn't. But P4 and P5 on the day for Mercedes, considering all the trouble that they had in Bahrain in preseason testing, that's a good day at the office. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think Lewis is still struggling and he's not really confident in that car. And I think George is maybe a little bit more confident.
Well, George is used to driving crap cars.
Right.
So
Well, exactly. He was in Williams for 3 years. So
he's pretty used to it.
It's the same exact thing that, he's getting off to a much better, a very similar start to what happened last year. I mean, he ended P7 last week and ended up P4 this week. So Mercedes, a much more consistent weekend this week. And I think that, given everything, the pressure that they're under, mainly just from their fans, but the pressure.
Well, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton fans are very dramatic.
Yes, the pressure that they're under and everything. I think this weekend was as good as they could have hoped. They probably were never going to challenge Fernando Alonso, but being faster than the Ferraris at this point of the season, that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
If I'm Toto Wolff, I know winning everything and dominating the way that they have is the standard, but I think they need to take a step back, zoom out, look at everything, and the fact that they were faster than Ferrari on this weekend, I think that's as good as they could have done, and they should be happy with that weekend.
Considering this track supposedly should have been much better for Ferrari, and they were nowhere near Ferrari in Bahrain.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I think that's as good as a weekend as you can hope. I think Australia next race is going to be challenging for them. Another challenge, but they get some upgrades, which apparently they have upgrades that are coming that are going to make a world of difference, because I think they're redesigning the side pods. They're doing a lot of different concepts. They're going in a different direction with the car, and so I think
it's about time.
Yeah, I know.
It's about time.
So I think they're moving in the right direction, and I think this weekend is a good indication of that.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think solid B for Mercedes.
Yeah.
Up next is Aston Martin.
Wow, this is tough.
Well, I think Stroll's retirement has nothing to do with Lance Stroll.
No. Yeah. So I'd give him a solid B plus, because they had a pretty decent weekend up until Lance Stroll's retirement. Lance Stroll was running a great race. I mean, Fernando Alonso on the podium again, absolutely awesome. So I mean, the retirement does suck, but that's kind of out of Lance Stroll and really the team's control. So,
I'll give them an A-. I think Alonso qualified. He was third fastest in qualifying. Ended up starting on the front row and got the jump of Perez at the beginning of the race. So, and. Yeah, he ended up third, but there was no stopping Red Bull and Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez today. He was better than literally everybody that wasn't driving a Red Bull today. And Lance Stroll, he qualified P5. He out-qualified Lewis Hamilton. I think he was fixing to be mixing it up with the Ferraris and the Mercedes all race. It's unfortunate that he had to retire when he did, but I think he was going to end up in probably right around fifth or sixth for him today, which it's Lance Stroll. I mean, which when you look at that compared to Fernando Alonso is not great, but it's Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso is your teammate, So I give them an A- because it's a weekend that you want.
We saw what Fernando Alonso was able to do in 2012 with a car that was slower than Red Bull and was able to fight until the last race. I would agree. I'm still going to stick with the B plus on that. But the last one with Red Bull, how can you not give him an A?
A+.
I'm not going to give him an A+ just yet, because they did have the drive shaft issue. Drive shaft? Yeah, I pronounced that right. They did have the drive shaft issue, and Max unfortunately was not able to really put a qualifying together. But Max's race was really great. And
Max, it was as good.
The only reason why I'm not giving it an A+ is because it wasn't, qualifying 1-2, finish the race 1-2. So there was a little slight blemish on the weekend with the drive shaft issue, but how can you not give him at least an A? Like,
Yeah.
They had a great Max Verstappen, a whole nother planet, and being able to finish 1-2 again. I mean, and in Checo, pole race win. I don't think it was a grand slam for Checo. No, it was not. It was not because Fernando Alonso led a bunch of laps. But yeah, gosh. Great weekend for Red Bull. I
still give them an A+ because it's not like what happened in 2021 where Max Verstappen wasn't able to finish his lap because he put it in the wall.
Yeah.
It was a drive shaft issue that was out of his control that they still don't know what caused it because there was no data on it.
Well, they're still suffering from drive shaft issues.
I think the fact that they're still suffering from that is worrisome. I think that is if that issue continues, it's going to allow teams like Aston Martin and Mercedes and Ferrari to capitalize when they can't. Yeah. But I think that's all that any of those teams will ever do this season.
Yeah, and they're only going to be able to capitalize when Red Bull.
So the reason why I give them an A+ is because that wound was not really inflicted by Max Verstappen. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even really inflicted by the team because, after the failure in Australia last year, they had no engine failures for the rest of the season. Mm-hmm. I don't see a reason for that to be concerned. Max Verstappen clearly was not concerned about it after qualifying, and he ended up second place. And Sergio Perez with a statement win today. Mm-hmm. He had the measure of Max Verstappen and everybody else. It was a beautifully managed race. I think we're starting to see a little bit of animosity creep in between Max and Checo, and I think Checo's really starting to get close to Max, and I think that's threatening Max a little bit. It's very 2015, 2016 Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg. Mm-hmm. I don't think it will get that as hostile because I think
Max is pretty hot-headed, but I don't think the two of them together, both Nico and Lewis, are very hot-headed.
Yeah,
and I don't think it'll get to that level.
I don't think it will either, but there's potential there. And I think this weekend with such a statement win and Max Verstappen ignoring team orders to back off, he was asked to do a 1:33.0 and he was still putting in 1:32.6s, and he was 0.4 faster than where he was being. So he was pushing, he was ignoring team orders, which is not the first time that he's done that.
No, it's not the first time, but it is a concern.
It'll be interesting to see where this goes, but considering Max Verstappen started 15th, second was probably all he was going to be able to do anyway. Mm-hmm. So I take that as a complete win, complete damage limitation. Yeah. I think the personnel problem and the drive shaft problem are issues that will need to be monitored over the next few months as we get into the summer, especially as we get into the summer and it gets hotter.
Yeah,
but I don't think that's cause for concern right now.
I don't think it. I think if there is if there's going to be any downfall of Red Bull this year, which it doesn't really look like there will be, I think it'll be the struggles between the two drivers.
Yeah.
Very similar to Mercedes. Mm-hmm. Granted, that car was just so above and beyond everyone else that no one else could compete. But I think there could be instances where them competing on track and ignoring team orders, things like that, I think that will be their undoing this year if there is an undoing of Red Bull. That will be their issue. But I don't see it really becoming an issue, even with the most famous one, Lewis and Nico, or Senna and Prost. They were still able to fight for championships. So I don't think it'll be really that. I think it'll be the undoing would be having to wait until the last race to wrap up the championship rather than a couple races before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it'll be interesting. I mean, let's take a look.
You did bring up a good point though about summer and their drive shaft issue. If it get to the really hot months of the summer and they're having drive shaft issues, maybe that could be, maybe Aston Martin or Ferrari or Mercedes could come in and challenge them.
But it'll be interesting to see because there is a 1-point lead that Max Verstappen has over Sergio Perez. Mm-hmm. So it's just 1 point. There's 1 point in it. So it'll be really interesting to see where we go from here. To wrap up our podcast, because we are running out of time, We are each going to give our top performers of the weekend. What is yours?
I have to give it to Checo. I'm a huge Sergio Perez fan. I love Checo. He's awesome. I've been rooting for him ever since Malaysia 2012. When he got that, he almost won that race. But I love Checo. He qualified on pole, won the race. He was my top performer of the weekend. Checo owns Saudi Arabia. He owns it. It's Checo's track.
Yeah. I am going to give it to George Russell purely because that Mercedes, they had a really good weekend, a really consistent weekend. I think their pace overall this weekend was really good, but on average, I think they outperformed that car this weekend, both Lewis and George. But, he qualified P3. He only ended up P4 because Max Verstappen was able to make up the places that he did. Managed the race pretty well.
I think
he kept Sainz behind him for a while in those opening phases, and I just think it was a very solid, quiet, not talked about, but a very solid race from George Russell.
And I think had the safety car not happened, I think he could have made work of the Ferraris, and I think he could have finished on the podium.
Yeah, I think it would have. I think and probably Lewis, honestly too. I think both of those Mercedes would have finished where they did ahead of the Ferraris, regardless of the safety car. It was going that way anyway, but they just lucked us into some strategy which cemented their position ahead of them. So I think, I would love to give it to both Mercedes drivers, but if I'm going to pick one, I'm going to pick George Russell because he was the leading of the two.
We love George.
Practice this weekend didn't look great. It didn't look like they were going to be where they were, and they ended up, George put it on the second row in qualifying. So I think, which qualified P4, he started P3, but qualified P4, ended up P4 in the race. That was just a really solid weekend for him.
In a bulldozer of a car.
Yeah. So, yeah, I give it to George. I mean, you have to give it to Max, but I didn't want to be the boring,
the safe pick.
The safe pick, because that's the obvious pick, right?
Oh, that's
Max is he is the top performer of the weekend. And on a street track, he went from 15th to 2nd. He gained 14 positions. On a street track, even one that's as high speed as Jeddah, that's tough. So in an effort to not give it to just Max, George did a fantastic weekend, and I think he deserves the praise.
Yeah.
So that is all for this episode, our Saudi Arabian Grand Prix review episode. We will be back in 2 weeks' time for our Australian Grand Prix review episode.
Yeah. We are not going to... We did a live watch-along event on YouTube for qualifying for Saudi Arabia.
We'll be doing for all of the other races.
But we're not going to do it for Australia because qualifying is 1 a.m. and I don't want to do that 1 a.m. on a Saturday when it's the weekend and we both work full-time jobs.
Yep, and I am actually working that weekend. We have shows that weekend. Yeah. So we will be watching qualifying and the race on our own time, but there will be an Australian Grand Prix review episode. I don't believe there was last year.
No, it was a great race
last season. But we will be back. We will see you in 2 weeks' time for some Australian Grand Prix.
Yep. Be sure, subscribe. We're posting a lot more content on TikTok and YouTube, so be sure to follow our TikTok page. We want to be able to do the live watch-along stuff on our TikTok page, but we need 1,000 followers. We're not there yet, but be sure to follow us on TikTok. Subscribe, share with your friends. Follow us on Twitter as well. All the social medias, and we'll see you next time.